Conservation is a vital part of the work of the Essex Record Office, and we are lucky to have our own in-house conservation studio, which takes care of all the day-to-day conservation needs of the ERO. Paper is one of the materials that the conservators of the ERO work with most frequently. Tears and holes in paper can be conserved by hand, but when there is a large batch to process, sometimes we will use a special machine called a leafcaster. This is the ERO's leafcaster. It is quite a specialised piece of equipment and was made especially for us. This machine fills holes and tears in paper by sucking paper pulp into those holes using a vacuum. To begin with, each sheet of paper is washed to remove dirt and to help neutralise any acidity in the paper to prevent further deterioration. Once the paper has dried, it is then prepared for the leafcaster. The paper is laid out on a sheet of a special plastic called Melanex, then sprayed down with water, and any rough edges carefully flattened out, first by using a needle and then by brushing another sheet of plastic over the top. This plastic sheet is then carefully removed, leaving the document perfectly flat. Any damaged areas are then coated with wheat starch paste, which acts as an adhesive. The entire sheet is then covered in a material known as spider tissue. This is a very fine, supportive tissue. The writing can still be read through it, but it is extremely strong. Once the repair is complete and the document dries, the tissue will only adhere to the areas where the conservator applied the wheat starch paste. The spider tissue is sprayed with water, then carefully brushed out over the sheet of paper to smooth out any wrinkles. Once the damaged sheet is prepared, it is time to make some paper pulp. Strips of paper manufactured using traditional techniques are soaked in beakers of water and then put into a blender. The paper and spider tissue are then placed into the leafcaster. They are flattened once more using the same technique of brushing a sheet of plastic over them. More pieces of Melanex are placed around the sheet to form a mould for the paper pulp to run into. A grid and weights are placed over the top to stop the sheet from floating away. Then the leafcaster is pumped full of water. Once the leafcaster is full of water, the paper pulp is added. Our conservator might make this look easy, but there is a real technique in adding the pulp so that it settles in the right way. The conservator then switches on the vacuum pump on the leafcaster, which drains away the water. The paper pulp is sucked down into the holes in the paper, filling them from edge to edge, forming new paper in the gaps. A fine mesh under the document stops the pulp disappearing with the water. Once all the water is drained away, the conservator uses a sponge to soak up any excess water on the surface of the paper. This is how the paper looks at this point. You can see where the paper pulp has settled into the gaps between the edges of the paper and the Melanex strips. It even fills very small tears in the paper. The Melanex strips which formed the mould are removed. The newly filled paper is lifted out of the machine and placed between two thick pieces of felt to absorb the remaining moisture. The felted sheet is then placed between two boards in a press to help squeeze out the water and speed up the drying process. The damp felts are changed at least 3 times to draw out any remaining moisture. Once the repaired sheet appears dry, normally the next day, it is removed from the press and placed between dry blotters and under a weighted board for a number of days to encourage it to dry flat. The dry sheets look like this. Holes and tears have been filled, and new paper has formed around the outside of the sheet. The last stage in the process is to remove the spider tissue from the areas where it is not needed. The tissue will adhere to the areas coated in wheat starch paste earlier in the process, where it will provide extra strength. The conservator uses a needle, a small spatula, and curved tweezers to carefully remove the excess tissue. This is a painstaking job and can take several minutes for each sheet. The edges are carefully torn or trimmed away using a scalpel. The finished result is a piece of paper which is much stronger and easier to handle. All holes are filled with new paper and formerly weak areas are strengthened. The whole process is then repeated for each individual sheet in that batch of papers, perhaps up to hundreds of sheets at a time. The special storage conditions at the ERO provide the best possible environment for the long-term survival of archival documents, preserving them for future generations.